Right, let's hope it doesn't blow over. It's a bit windy. All right, good day. How's it? Welcome back. This week's topic is shame. We've been dealing with shame at the center in our specialized shame weeks. We were processing shame all of last week, and we have continued to process this week. And it will, as usual, probably go over to next week as well, just because it's such an important topic and there's so many different areas to discuss and things to unpack and lots of stuff to share. Highly emotionally draining on the residents and the staff, but certainly something that is crucial for any kind of recovery process to take part. As we kind of unpack, shame and addiction go hand in hand. In fact, where there's addiction, there's guaranteed shame. It's not to say that where there's shame, there's guaranteed addiction, but shame and addiction share very common traits. They both like to be hidden, they both like to be ignored, they both like to not be exposed, they both like to not be spoken about, and they really cause a deep down turmoil in a lot of people. So I think it's important we talk about shame. Basic concept is understanding the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt is something that I've done, that I can be guilty for, and that I can feel bad about. Shame actually tells me that I am bad or I am the problem, and there's not much that can be done about that. Guilty of stealing something and shameful that I'm actually a thief. These are kind of the big differences. And shame hides underneath lots of psychological defenses and lots of layers of denial. And like I said, really doesn't want to be exposed, which I think as we go through this topic and this week's discussion, we will see how shame absolutely damages relationships because it comes out in really unhealthy behaviors. I think first starting point is just to understand that supporters also carry an immense amount of shame. They might not want to see it, they might not want to look at it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I suppose we can start with a very basic concept of just the shame of being an addict, or the shame of having a loved one as an addict, or the shame of not being good enough or well enough or prepared enough or lovable enough for somebody to not stop using and to choose addiction over you. And for the addict side is the shame of continuously choosing addiction despite loving people. Really the deep-rooted belief in ourselves that we're just not good enough. I think as we've spoken about in a couple of other episodes and videos is even the stigma around addiction and rehab and recovery in the world and society. The mere mention of being an addict or having an addict in your family, it automatically triggers that shame because society doesn't look pleasingly upon addicts, and often society that don't understand have a heavy judgment towards families that produce these addicts. And so I think just from the starting point of this meeting for supporters and addicts, the mere fact that we're on a support group for addiction can in itself inadvertently cause a little bit of shame. And so even as supporters and parents and spouses, I think one of the first things to get to grips with is the shame in and around this addiction, and the shame that it may have triggered in yourself of not being a good enough parent or not being a good enough spouse, or where did I go wrong, what's wrong with me, why am I not good enough, why can't I fix this, why can nobody love me. Those are some serious internal conflicts that we may want to pretend doesn't exist, that we may consciously try and justify, that we may kind of have coming out in different emotions like anger and rage and resentment and control. We might say we don't blame ourselves, but deep down there's potentially a very hidden level of what's wrong with me. Addicts on the meeting can understand there's always this deep down thing that says, what's wrong with me? Why am I so different? Why am I so unlovable? Why am I so ugly? Why am I so bad? Why do I keep hurting people? Why do I keep doing the things I don't want to do? And that internal shame, that identity built on there's something flawed about me. It really causes so many issues in our life. So yeah, we hide shame all the time. I think the premise of shame is that it's not something we walk around experiencing all the time. It's something that we cover up with defenses and psychological barriers. It's something we pretend doesn't exist. It's something that we keep far, far away from those closest to us, and we keep it far away from ourselves. But shame always has a way of kind of rearing its ugly head. And it generally does that when it's about to be exposed. And I think a big concept of understanding shame just for this topic is when we have this feeling like our shame is going to be exposed. In other words, our limitations, our badness, our failures, our inadequacies are about to be exposed, even just to us and not even the other person. We react in ways to protect that vulnerability. We come out aggressive, we come out rageful, we come out controlling, or we avoid and isolate and move away and break away from the relationship. We have many, many defenses that protect ourselves from the shame. The problem with the defenses around shame is that it inadvertently breaks down more relationships. It inadvertently feeds into our belief that we're going to fail and nobody's ever going to love us. It inadvertently kind of reproduces the behaviors that reinforces the beliefs about ourselves. When we get rageful and controlling and aggressive, the aftermath of that exposure is a deep sense of shame and guilt of how could we do this? How did we overreact? How did we get to becoming this person? What's wrong with us? But that doesn't necessarily stop us. That doesn't necessarily say, all of these behaviors and patterns are being caused by shame. No, it just pushes us to try harder, to try and be better, to try and manage ourselves so that we don't have to feel bad about who we actually are. When we truly get to grips with our secret shame, our secret failures, our secret beliefs on who we are, when we truly get to grips with those things, we actually get to a really desperate place where our spirituality, our relationship with the higher power, our connections with God start to really break down. Not to make this a spiritual group, but there's a strong component in understanding that being loved by a loving God while carrying shame is really, really difficult. There's a strong component of understanding when shame is driving our life and we're trying to control everything and make everything seem better, make everything look better and be better, that we're kind of putting on a pretense, that we're kind of putting on a facade. And in that pretense and in that facade, we inadvertently push God out of the equation. We inadvertently remove ourselves from God, who can see the deep, dark truths. And the problem that we have when we go into these shame identities and lifestyles and these shame things start to remove us from God is that we become more and more alone. We become more and more unloved. We become more and more unaccepted. And so that whole process just reinforces this pattern that I'm not good enough, that I can't do this, that and no matter how hard I try, that things are just not working. I keep failing. I keep repeating the same behaviors. I keep coming up with the same outcomes. And yeah, these are patterns that will continue to grow in your life if you do not go and address the shame. Like, we also have to, specifically for supporters and probably for some of the addicts that haven't been for treatment, we have to understand that a lot of our shame comes from childhood. A lot of shame comes from childhood trauma. A lot of shame comes from when we were growing up and our perceptions about how we were loved, if we were loved, what we were worth when we were growing up as children. And I suppose as supporters, sometimes we can understand. I mean, I know that addiction is a genetic illness. So I know that at least 50% of the supporters have had addiction, most likely in their family. A lot of supporters have come from addict homes where dad was an alcoholic or mom was an alcoholic or an addict. And, they grew up in the anxiety and the stress and the chaos of another person's addiction. And then we have children, and then we try and raise our children differently to how we were raised, and we try and protect them from all of these things, yet our children become addicts, and we're just triggered back into that same pattern of, I'm not good enough, nobody loves me enough to actually put me first, why am I surrounded by all of these things? And so when we look further back into our lives and we start processing and unpacking sexual abuse and emotional abuse and physical abuse and all of those traumas that we experience, they inadvertently build this identity on shame. And we will probably discover in our lives, we seek out the same type of partner, we seek out the same type of friends, we have this revolving pattern of consequences in our life because we're making choices inadvertently built on protecting ourselves from experiencing shame. If I couldn't fix dad as an addict, then I'm going to try and fix my boyfriend or my husband. And if I couldn't fix my boyfriend and my husband, I'm going to try and fix my son or my daughter. And if I can only fix my son and my daughter, then again I'm going to have worth. But my son and my daughter and my husband are not getting well, and that is a reflection on my worth. So there's something deep down must be wrong with me, and we can't live with that feeling. So we become more controlling, and we become more emotional, we become more aggressive, and we become more depressed, and we become more isolated. And these behaviors and actions and choices and defenses create this perpetual cycle that just doesn't seem to ever end. There's a thing called the shame spiral, which is quite a cool little concept to understand, specifically for the guys in treatment, but I suppose sometimes for the supporters as well. When we're in these relationships with people and partners and friends and whatever, often we, for some reason, get this feeling that we're about to be exposed, that our shame's about to come out. And so we start to get a little bit fearful of the rejection and the abandonment and the judgment and whatever. And so, we subtly move ourselves. We create a little bit of distance. We shut down a little bit with the people. It's a self-preserving thing. If I don't allow my shame to be exposed, then everything will be okay. And as we try and create a little bit of distance, what inevitably happens is that the people we're trying to create distance with move closer in. What's wrong? What's going on? Why are you so distant? Why are you moving away, etc.? And that, for a shame-bound person, is like an attack. There's nothing wrong. Leave me alone. Why are you questioning me? Get out of my space. I've got my own problems. This is personal. I don't need anybody involving themselves in that. And we become that defensive person again. And what happens is those relationships, those people inadvertently move away. They remove themselves in a self-preservation mindset to say, well, I'm not understanding what's going on here, so I'm going to take a couple of steps backwards. And for the shame-bound person, that person taking steps backward just reinforces the fact that, yes, I was right. This person's going to leave me. This person's going to abandon me. This person's going to fail me. And so we have this self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating cycle of breaking down relationships. And I think we've seen it all over the place. We see it with our parents, we see it with our siblings, we see it with our partners, we see it with our children, we see it with our close friends, we see it all over the place. We get this nitty-gritty feeling that we're about to be exposed, and so we kind of shut down and withdraw a little bit. And as we do that, people come a bit closer to find out what's going on. And as they come closer, we become more and more vulnerable and exposed, and the defenses kick in and we have to push away. And a lot of the times, if we do this for years and years and years and years and years, what we find is we never actually have true connection. We never actually have true relationships because we're constantly trying to conceal a very deep part of ourselves from everybody around us. And so, getting into intimate, loving relationships for a shame-bound person is extremely difficult because the vulnerabilities that we need to have true, authentic, intimate relationships are impossible to have because we're constantly trying to hide our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities and the things that we're ashamed about. So, I think obviously it is so deeply hidden in most people, the shame thing. It's not even something that a lot of people can actually identify with, because we've convinced ourselves it doesn't exist, and we've carried on with life, and we've just manned up, and we've gotten over it, and we're moving past it, and we're moving on, and we're becoming successful at our work, and we're doing all these kind of things to avoid just kind of facing ourselves and blaming everything and everybody around us. You can see the similarities between shame and addiction emerging. You can see how shame and addiction play hand in hand with one another. And so, I think while we as Johara and a support motivation meeting cannot help you get to grips with your shame, it is certainly something that I would encourage us to go out and investigate and explore with somebody close that knows how to kind of try and unlock it. We can't carry on with the pretense. We can't carry on with the denial. We can't carry on with the defenses. We can't expect everybody else to change in order to make our life better. We can't live in this constant world of trying to manage everything and everyone to keep our own status quo going. We really have to get to a point of coming to terms with our shame, which is 9 times out of 10 quite the lie. It's not exactly a truthful belief about ourselves, but it's ingrained really, really deeply. So whether it's failure as a spouse or a person or a partner, or failure in recovery, or failure as a parent, or an ongoing trauma crisis of relationships from when you were in your childhood, they are deep ingrained shame-based identity beliefs that really, really need to be challenged if you have any hope in stopping the ongoing cycle of chaotic relationships and lifestyles. So I think we will go into a little bit more depth on Thursday about what shame actually is, and we will have a little bit more discussions on how to identify your shame and where it stems from, and how to know whether it's driving force in your life. But again, if something in this video is hitting home for you, it's probably about time you find somebody that can help you to manage and get through and deal with your own shame, so that you can be okay with who you are and not have this hidden enemy underneath the surface just waiting to attack and break down everything that we build and all of our relationships. So see you on Thursday. Thank you for watching. Have a good week. Ciao.